Chapter 3: A Destructive Relationship. During the first few months of the nicotine trick, I realized that it was taking more than 2 hours to explain to smokers why they really smoke. This was because, although the nicotine trick itself only takes a few minutes to explain, smokers always ask a lot of other questions, such as, what will I replace smoking with? When will the cravings go? Should I avoid pubs and other smokers while I'm trying to stop smoking? What should I do to help myself concentrate? Will I put on weight? When I realized that most smokers have these questions and more, I started looking for a way of explaining the nicotine trick that would answer these questions at the same time, a familiar concept that smokers could immediately relate to at an emotional level. I found it by chance in a woman I'll call Charlene, a stressed-out smoker whom I met through one of her work colleagues. Charlene was a sales rep working for a computer company, and she was one of the heaviest smokers I've ever met. She was only 28 at the time, although she openly complained about looking 10 years older because of the effects of smoking. Even at such a young age, she already had the dry hair, damaged skin, and milky eyes of the truly chronic smoker. Charlene had absolutely no intention of stopping smoking. When I first asked her why she smoked, she insisted that she enjoyed it and refused to discuss the matter further. I didn't push because I never try to persuade people to stop smoking, but it was obvious that Charlene was desperately unhappy and worried about the effect smoking was having on her looks and health. Over a period of weeks, I explained the nicotine trick to a number of Charlene's smoking friends, two of whom stopped smoking easily and painlessly. This made Charlene inquisitive, and gradually she started to open up about what seemed to trigger her cravings. It emerged that Charlene was unhappily involved in an affair with someone where she worked, a married man who publicly treated her with contempt and who often ridiculed her behind her back. Charlene openly admitted that her feelings of anger and rejection would very often explode in the office. Each time she had a blazing row with her boyfriend, she would storm outside and smoke a cigarette, or sometimes two. I asked her why she was driven to poison herself with cigarette smoke every time her boyfriend let her down. She said, "Well, at least cigarettes don't treat me like shit." By uttering those words, Charlene made me realize that the relationship smokers have with cigarettes isn't really physical, it's emotional. I also realized that smoking is exactly the same as the pointless and one-sided affair Charlene was involved in. It's a relationship based on betrayal, deception, illusion, and disappointment. As soon as I realized this, I suddenly had a new way of explaining the nicotine trick to smokers, a way that explains your relationship with cigarettes as an obsessive sexual affair. As you're about to discover, by seeing smoking in this way, you'll find it easy to understand the real truth behind the way cigarettes make you feel. You'll see how you've done all the work right from the start, how part of your brain has been tricked into faking pleasure when you smoke, why it hurts so much to see someone else enjoying a cigarette after you've stopped smoking. In 2001, I started organizing small workshops at a local community center in which I spoke to groups of smokers directly. Almost all of these people had read at least one book on how to stop smoking. Some smokers even brought these books with them, probably hoping they would act like some sort of lucky charm. Strangely, many people who came to workshops had successfully stopped smoking by using stop smoking books, but at some point the effect had worn off and they'd started smoking again. One thing that took me by surprise was the fact that each time I spoke to a group of smokers, even the quiet ones seemed absolutely hell-bent on telling me why they smoked, why they found it so hard to give up, their thoughts on whether smoking is habit or drug addiction. It's neither, as you'll soon see, and so on. To start with, I couldn't understand why smokers were so insistent on telling me and each other their opinions on smoking in such detail. Surely I was there to explain it to them, not the other way round. I now realize that smokers do this not because they want to argue or interrupt, but because they desperately want to believe that they're in control of their relationship with cigarettes. When I was a smoker, I was the same, totally determined to believe that I was in control, even though my reason for smoking mysteriously changed every few years. First it was to appear adult and sophisticated, then it was because I enjoyed it, and eventually it was because I couldn't quit. The real problem was that until I eventually stumbled across the nicotine trick, I never realized that my real reason for keeping the affair going didn't exist in my conscious mind, so I was never able to do anything about it. But that's enough about me. Now you know how this book came about. Let's talk about you. If you're ever going to end your affair with cigarettes, you need to know why you started it in the first place. Your affair with cigarettes, you can't have an affair unless something starts it. So let's look at how your affair with cigarettes began. First of all, let's be clear on exactly what I mean by an affair, as opposed to a normal, healthy relationship. For the purposes of this, let's say that in order for a relationship to be an affair, it needs to be three things. It needs to be painful, it needs to involve deceit, and it needs to have no future. Smoking matches all three of these criteria handsomely. Let's see why. I assume that you don't need an explanation of why smoking is painful, but let's look at the most extreme example of how painful smoking can be: lung cancer. If you smoke, maybe you take the view that lung cancer is simply an occupational hazard, or just one of those tired statistics rolled out each year by all the anti-smoking talking heads who seem so desperate to get their faces on television every National Stop Smoking Day. Maybe you don't plan to get lung cancer. If so, let me tell you about a friend of mine who had a plan. He's called Dave, and he's a train driver. Even without me giving his surname, I'm sure Dave would want me to point out that he's not just any old train driver. He drives the intercity trains, the fast ones. By the time you read this, he may have achieved his lifetime's ambition of driving the high-speed Eurostar trains to Paris. Dave was a heavy smoker until I got to him, almost by mistake, with a single, little-known fact, a dirty little secret that the cigarette companies have kept carefully hidden from smokers. It wasn't the nicotine trick itself, it was something else, something deeply unpleasant. Before I tell you what this secret is, let me tell you about Dave's plan. Dave's father, a smoker, died of lung cancer in his 50s. Dave had been smoking since he was 15, and he'd calculated that even if he smoked until he was 40, he'd still be able to stop and probably not get lung cancer. He thought he'd figured out a way in which he could smoke without it catching him out. Maybe you're expecting me to rant about how stupid, irresponsible, and suicidal Dave's plan was. Maybe you think I'd be right if I did. Actually, many smokers I help do have a masochistic desire for me to do exactly this, but I never indulge it, and I never will. Here's why. Every smoker in the world has a similar plan. I had one, you've got one. Maybe you don't think you've got a plan. Maybe you just want to read this book and see how it goes. Maybe you're waiting for a train and flicking through this book in the bookshop. Maybe you're just one of these naturally curious types. But whatever you think, you don't plan to keep smoking until you get lung cancer. And if you don't plan to do that, it means you do plan to avoid it happening, which means you have got a plan. You just can't quite figure out how to implement it or when. Let me tell you something else. The cigarette companies figured this out decades ago. Why else do you think every tobacconist, newsagent, and garage sells cigarettes in packets of 10 as well as packets of 20? Do you really think it's because smokers can't afford 20 cigarettes? No. Smokers will always find the money for cigarettes, as you and I well know. Do you think it's because of the discreet, convenient size? Hardly. Any pretense of convenience will be blown away as soon as the packet is opened and there's a handful of cellophane and foil to dispose of. And any pretense of discretion will be blown away by the first stinking blast of smoke. In fact, the real reason cigarettes are sold in tens is because millions of smokers are so utterly depressed by the fact that they smoke that they don't even want to consider the idea of being forced to smoke another 20 cigarettes. Maybe just another 10 cigarettes will finally satisfy whatever it is they need satisfying so they can stop. But does it work? Does 10 more cigarettes finally kill the urge? Does it hit the spot once and for all? Does it finally do it for you? No. Which means that each cigarette is somehow creating a need for more cigarettes, a fact that, even by itself, suggests that smoking can't be driven by pleasure. After all, when you've watched your favorite film, does it immediately create a desperate need to watch it all over again? No. That would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? But that's the point. I've already explained that your relationship with cigarettes is an affair, and how many affairs do you know of that are based on logic and common sense? Anyway, let me tell you what I told Dave. It was a piece of information revealed by a former US Surgeon General. It's this. Tobacco is grown in soil that is rich in phosphates. As a result, cigarette smoke contains a chemical called polonium-210. Big deal, right? Except that polonium-210 is radioactive. It forms radiation hotspots in living lung tissue, areas of infected tissue which then slowly become cancerous tumors. When I told Dave this, his face went grey. In fact, let me be more specific. Dave's face went more grey. As a heavy smoker, his face was already grey. I was surprised that this fact made Dave so upset, because I hadn't even bothered to mention it to anyone else. I asked him why it made any difference how cigarettes cause lung cancer. He told me it was just the idea of breathing radioactive metals directly into his chest. It just somehow seemed worse, more obscene, more suicidal than the idea of black tar. The truth is, the tar in cigarettes is carcinogenic, but the radiation from the polonium is the real killer. Scientists have estimated that in just 1 year, a 40-a-day smoker is exposed to the radiation equivalent of hundreds of chest X-rays. Incidentally, if this fact has actually made you want to light a cigarette right now, don't worry. When you understand what nicotine really does, you'll know exactly why this happens and how to make it stop. 3 installments. The first part is the physical agony of the disease itself. When tumors start growing inside your lungs, they slowly rip apart the most tender and sensitive tissue in your entire body. I'm told that the pain is almost impossible to describe. Some days it feels like a dull ache. On other days, it feels like hot coals deep inside your chest. And consider this, if your leg is broken, you can rest it while it gets better. You can ease the pressure on it by lying down, or by using crutches, or by using a wheelchair, or whatever. You can give it time to get better. Not with lung cancer. You can't just stop breathing or you'll die. So you're forced to keep stretching tissue that is now riddled with dark growths, growths that will probably break up and travel round the rest of your body. This is called metastasis. When this happens, it's a lottery without the possibility of winning anything as to which part of you gets cancer next. If you're female, it could be your cervix or your breasts. If you're male, it could be your testicles or penis. Whether you're male or female, it could be your brain, your stomach, your bowels, your kidneys, or your liver. It could be your throat. Have you ever seen those ex-smokers who now need a hole in their neck to breathe? Enough said, and the real pain hasn't even started yet. This is just the first installment. The second part is the treatment. It may involve chemotherapy, in which case you'll be pumped full of chemicals that will kill healthy tissue as well as hopefully some cancer cells. Even if your body tries to reject the chemicals, you'll be told to continue. When I was about 7, a woman who lived round the corner got lung cancer from smoking. I can still remember her. She was called Jane. She had blue eyes and long brown hair. She used to babysit for me and my younger brother. Then she got sick, and I heard my parents talking about smoking and lung cancer. I heard the word chemotherapy, and it terrified me. I knew there was something about the word, something that sounded like death. I only saw Jane one more time. I was riding my bike, and she was being driven back to her house from the hospital. No one told me that the treatment had failed and she'd come home to die. It was a hot, sunny day, but she was wearing what looked like a white balaclava. I asked my mother why she was wearing it. She gave some unlikely explanation to avoid scaring me. Years later, I discovered that, in addition to the chemotherapy, Jane had been given radiation therapy, which had caused all her hair to fall out, more radiation to add to the radiation from the cigarettes she'd smoked. Then there's the most agonizing pain of all, the pain of your family and friends being forced to watch you die, eaten up from the inside. Worse still, it's not as though you're dying because you're a hero or because you've been mortally injured trying to save someone's life. You're dying because you smoked cigarettes. You're lying in a hospital bed with a hissing oxygen canister next to you, asking yourself one question: what did I do wrong? So before it gets that far, let's ask this question right now. What did you do wrong? The answer, like the question itself, is painfully simple. Not much. You made one fatal mistake, which was smoking your second cigarette, and you might now be heading towards an agonizing death simply because this single mistake led you into the path of a strange chemical coincidence called the nicotine trick, a coincidence that caused your brain to make a fatal wrong connection, a crossed wire that has forced you to smoke again and again and again. Some smokers object to other people using the word forced. They don't like the implication that they don't choose to smoke. I don't blame them. Nevertheless, forced is the right word. Let me prove it. If you were walking along the pavement and a car suddenly veered off the road towards you, part of your brain would force you to jump out of the way, wouldn't it? Well, believe it or not, the mechanism that makes this happen is exactly the same mechanism that makes you light a cigarette, which is why you always want to smoke in stressful situations. By the end of this book, you'll know exactly how it works. There won't be a single element of doubt or confusion, which means that even if you decide to keep smoking for the rest of your life, you'll finally be doing it in full possession of the facts.